approval of the country's proposed budget is facing uncertainty, with political parties represented in the Government of National Unity at odds over some of Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's proposals. The proposed 1 percentage point VAT increase over 2 years has been one of the biggest bones of contention, but Godongwana has argued it's necessary. Ziyanda Ngobo is live for us from Parliament. We're less than 3 hours away, Ziyanda, from this vote going ahead, but there have been a lot of machinations on the sidelines, including developments in the committee itself, with the ANC and IFP voting for that fiscal framework report, with that featured recommendation from Action SA effectively throwing their support behind the ANC. Where are we this hour in a story that has seemingly been changing hour to hour?
Absolutely, and starting from last night, after the ANC and IFP supported Action SA's proposal, the ANC had a caucus meeting in the evening led by President Cyril Ramaphosa and the national officials, following his meeting with DA leader John Steenhuisen in a last-ditch attempt really to try and find consensus before this day actually came about. And of course, we understand that President Cyril Ramaphosa basically saying that the DA put themselves into this corner. They must see how they get themselves out of this predicament that they find themselves in relation to what the DA has said, that they will in no uncertain terms accept that 1 percentage point VAT hike over the next 2 years. Seemingly the DA being caught off guard by that move from Action SA, their own nemesis, so to speak, given that many Action SA members actually come from the Democratic Alliance, and also the DA also hosting their own FedEx meeting to discuss a way forward. But certainly, Iman, this moment seems to be the last straw on the camel's back that will break the relationship between the ANC and DA, being the biggest GNU partners. And on that note, let's speak to Karabo Khakhau, because the mood has completely changed, filing for divorce papers.
Ziyanda, hello. Hello to yourself. Hello to your viewers. Thank you for the opportunity to engage. We've said from the onset that under no circumstance will we support a budget that does not put the best interests of South Africans forward. You cannot, in the current economic climate, expect South Africans who are already battling to put food on the table for themselves and their families, South Africans who do not know whether they're going to be able to buy school shoes for their children, South Africans who cannot afford the cost of transport, South Africans who cannot afford the cost of living altogether or breathing, and expect those South Africans to dig deeper into pockets that are already leaking to fit the bill. A bill that I want to repeat to say that is a bill of 31 years of mismanagement, of corruption, and a lack of disrespect for South Africans. And that is something that the Democratic Alliance is very proud to have been fighting against, and it's something that has been true to our involvement in politics and our involvement in the Government of National Unity, and we're still not backing down. As for Action SA and their betrayal to the Republic of South Africa, history has no blank pages. They can try to spew propaganda on their social media and say that they averted a crisis altogether. But until we are able to see a gazetting of a reversal of the 1% increase in the next 2 years, and unless we are able to have an alternative fiscal framework table today at 2 o'clock, basically their decision yesterday in the Finance Committee is a ratification of the ANC's decisions altogether and their policy. And again, the Democratic Alliance has always been very clear that parties like Action SA have shown themselves to be ANC backup artists because they are unable to have a backbone that is true to what that they promised to South Africans. All that Action SA has promised South Africans was a lie. It was a pipe dream, and they have been exposed for who they are.
What was your leader, John Steenhuisen's feedback to the party after his meeting with President Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday?
So FedEx is yet to meet to have a discussion on the GNU in particular. Caucus is also yet to meet to do so today before we go on to vote altogether. But what I can confirm right now is that the conversations between the Democratic Alliance and the ANC has completely broken down. There is no conversation that is happening. And that is what South Africans must know. And South Africans must know that the conversation is not happening not because the Democratic Alliance does not want to reasonably negotiate, but it is because the ANC does not think it makes sense to cut down on corruption and wasteful and irregular expenditure. The ANC doesn't think it makes sense to deal with ghost employees across departments and municipalities, because those ghost employees exist as a consequence of cadres corruption altogether. And that is something that the Democratic Alliance will not be able to turn a blind eye on.
How do you explain to your constituency that you're now clear? Some would say you're flip-flopping. You said before the election that, in the campaigns you wouldn't work with the ANC. You came back after the electoral outcome. You said you'd work with the ANC. Even on the various issues that you faced with the NHI, Bella, and the Land Expropriation Act, you've set down those red lines several times. You've made this threat several times and said you would be rescuing South Africa. So clearly then your efforts to rescue the South Africa did not work this time when you tried to put down those conditions that the ANC and the president of this country decided not to accede to. How do you now explain to them that you're planning to leave this GNU and that this might be because you as a party probably pushed too hard and put yourselves in a corner? No?
Number one, on working with the ANC, John Steenhuisen, the federal leader of the Democratic Alliance, had made it clear from the onset that he was not ruling out working with the ANC. Of course, we went to seek a moonshot pact, the moonshot pact to ensure that we're able to galvanize support outside of the ANC. And that was in all honesty trying to make sure that we don't have to deal with them because they are not trustworthy, they do not operate in good faith, and certainly their interests are very far from that which are centered on South Africans and their aspirations and their protection, far from the constitution of this country. But we did so wanting to work with them because we understood that South Africans have always been safer in the hands of the Democratic Alliance in a GNU than without us there. There's only one political party in this country, Zianda, that has a proven track record of being able to master the politics of putting food on the table of South Africans. Here where we are in the Western Cape, this province, governed by the Democratic Alliance alone, has the lowest unemployment rate in this country, and no province comes any close to us. The people of this province under the leadership of Ellen Windy are able to record below 20% of unemployment. When you look at the books and how we govern them, if the Auditor General repeatedly tells us that if you want a master class on how to deal with the public purse, how to prioritize public funds, go to the Democratic Alliance and where they govern here in the Western Cape. And it is on the basis of that track record that we wanted to be able to copy and paste that into the government of national unity here. Of course, the ANC is threatened by that. They do not want that because they've been exposed to be lazy people who do not have the best interests of South Africans, who do not know what they are doing for government altogether. And that is why, as the Democratic Alliance, we are still fighting as hard as we are. We're going to go into that budget vote today unable to support it because it does not speak to economic growth. It does not speak to job creation. It does not speak to bridging the gap between the rich and the poor in this country, which is the liberation movement's promise altogether. We are 31 years into a democratic dispensation, and instead of the ANC being able to keep a record of making sure that we're able to live a dignified life in this country, we're plunged deeper into separation, plunged deeper into poverty, and that is something that the Democratic Alliance will continue to make sure that as far as we have the power, we will work hard to push against and reverse.
Some would say, though, it's the Democratic Alliance that's actually problematic. You tried to have that moonshot pact, it didn't work out. Many of the parties said it's because the DA is arrogant. You went into the government of national unity and it's not working out because parties are saying it's the DA that's arrogant, that has a superiority complex and does not know how to work with other parties. And some would say it's not a coincidence that the DA is a common denominator every time there has to be some kind of political arrangement with other political parties.
That is absolutely not true. Let me tell you why. When the Democratic Alliance negotiates and enters into a political relationship with anybody, the Bible of that relationship is the constitution of this country and what South Africans need. We find ourselves in a very difficult position if we have to compromise on South Africans just so to win a political game. As is seen now, that's what the ANC said. If the ANC and Action SA are able to find each other in cozy corners where they're able to flirt and lie to each other about a 0.5% increase altogether, which is something that we have been talking about, it shows you that the game here has never been about South Africans. The cause here has never been about about the economy. The cause here has never been about their money, but the cause is about politics, which is cruel to have a conversation about.
But I need to jump in there, because also the demands that you made to the president had nothing to do with the budget. They'd argue you wanted to use this budget to negotiate issues around Bella, the NHI, and the Expropriation Act, and that the other parties, at the very least, like Action SA, they were talking about tangible things about the actual economy and not using this budget to hold the GNU ransom, no?
That is not true, Zianda. The Bella Act, the minister who's responsible for the regulations there has always been the DA's Minister of Basic Education, Karabo Khakhau. So that is a separate conversation because the regulations are underway. The NHI is not a subject of budget, but is a subject of planning, because we agreed in the medium-term development plan that for as long as there's no conclusion in the GNU on how we're going to move forward on the NHI, we're not going to start planning for it budget-wise. To our shock, again, in malice that the ANC is, they are disingenuous altogether. 5 weeks later, we see a gazetting of the planning of this thing that we didn't agree on. So, of course, if we're going to see a budget line item that seeks to roll out something we didn't agree on, we're going to have a problem with it. Number two, on the Expropriation Act, that has been a long-standing conversation that we have been having, and that's why we've taken it to court as the Democratic Alliance. But how it fits into the budget conversation is that you cannot want to grow this country's economy and then have a legislation or a law that directly threatens investors' ability to own private property in this country. The current composition of the Expropriation Act pits South Africans exactly against a lack of freedom to own private property. That is nonsensical, it doesn't work, and that's why it's part of the fight. The reason why the ANC think our demands are unreasonable is because when you talk about fruitless, wasteful, and irregular expenditure, you are touching the livelihoods of cadres that depend on kickbacks, that depend on a corrupt system altogether to make a living. That makes them uncomfortable, because they must bear the brunt of standing in the sun or nakedly to the truth of their corruption. That's why they are uncomfortable.
All right, Karabo Khakhau speaks on behalf of the Democratic Alliance. You know, you can assess for yourself the response from the Democratic Alliance there, Iman, but certainly both parties still staring at each other in the eye and seeing who's going to blink first. But according to the ANC, they've got the numbers. They're going into this budget vote very confident this afternoon when those proceedings get underway. And those divorce papers are going to be filed, but from the perspective of the ANC, let the DA do what they need to do, and they've done what they've had to do by going around and speaking to other political parties in order to ensure that this budget is passed, and then the Treasury comes back within 30 days, which is before, of course, this VAT is meant to take effect on the 1st of May, with revenue proposals on how to plug that 28 billion that the 0.5 percentage point VAT hike would have plugged. So in essence, they're trying to avert, this VAT increase taking effect, but they want to do so. Just give the Treasury a little bit more time to work on this and possibly enter into a new marriage with the likes of Action SA.
Yeah, again, it's about what's in the best interest of South Africa and South Africans in terms of that fiscal framework. As the is just sharing there, the ANC going into this, and we've seen the reports, various reports which show how their numbers are stacking up in terms of support they've garnered now from the IFP.